Welcome back everyone, it's Liam from Levity Books and I hope you're reading well. Today we're looking at Sabrina by Nick Drnaso and I want this to be the video that convinces you to read comics. As always, I'm providing my analysis without spoilers to encourage new readers and also to encourage discussion from those who have read it. Today I'm going to show that indie comics speak on the level of high fiction and avant-garde films, and they deserve literary analysis. They deserve a very close reading and the respect that high art forms receive. And I believe Sabrina is the first comic unquestionably written for adults by an adult. And in this review I'm going to suggest that Sabrina is an extremely unique comic, although I found this author's previous work, Beverly, even better. And at the end of the video I'm going to justify why Sabrina was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize 2018 and maybe should have been shortlisted. So to begin, let's talk about the book itself. The cover lets you know that this is a dark comic, from the contrast from this girly pink to this blood red photo with the mischievous smile and the black silhouettes. And we open the book to find a shy girl who doesn't want to be photographed, and her name, Sabrina. And we realize this is the girl on the front cover, and then we begin by seeing her face again in the comic. It's a really wonderful exposition, and this is Nick Drnaso's first attempt at linear narrative, and it's fully successful. Sabrina is the story of a missing girl and follows her boyfriend from the beginning of her absence. It's paranoid, sad, violent, and showcases the negative impact social media, the news, and the internet can have on society. There are nightmares, panic attacks, death threats, conspiracy theories. All the characters are emotionally vulnerable. There are pages with so few words but so many emotions, and there are very powerful pieces in this book. The author of Sabrina, Drnaso, is the rising star in the comic scene, and he takes a lot from Chris Ware, who I think is the greatest living author, period. And Chris recognizes this connection between them. He's even drawn Nick Drnaso. And this connection between these two authors is the best thing happening in the comic scene right now. Nick's style is very distinctive from everyone else, and he doesn't get enough credit for the originality in his work, which can be seen in Sabrina. I'm going to go into that now. Nick has published 2 indie comics to date, Sabrina and Beverly. The titular character of both is a young woman who has disappeared, and the story follows how the community responds to this. I claim this similar element of Nick Drnaso's writing makes it detective fiction, although their content varies dramatically. I feel Nick Drnaso's style is derived from the great Edgar Allan Poe, a pioneer of Gothic poetry and detective fiction. In Poe's essay, The Philosophy of Composition, he states that the death of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in the world, and the lips best suited for such a topic are those of a bereaved lover. Now, I think this is exactly the case in Sabrina and Beverly, Nick Drnaso's 2 works. We're never quite sure whether the woman has died at the beginning, and that is the suspense. We aren't sure if the grief response by the lover is the appropriate thing in the situation. It's the not knowing of when and how to grieve that Nick Drnaso is getting at. And clearly the subject matter is going above and beyond the slapstick and superhero content that comics are normally known for. As this plot focuses on the feelings of the boyfriend of Sabrina, a missing woman, Nick Drnaso is working from the same perspective of Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven, which was the first detective narrative. I also see a lot of inspiration from the avant-garde film director David Lynch in the work of Nick Drnaso's comics, which is very welcome as it suits his stories. David Lynch was one of the first to popularize the death of a beautiful woman as the core focus of a narrative, most notably in his cult TV show Twin Peaks, which is one of my favorites. And ever since, this has spawned a dead girl trope in media, in TV and film, which feminists have only recently begun to criticize. The work of Lynch and Drnaso center around the loss of a woman. As a narrative event, the dead girl trope allows for a story that focuses on bystanderism, or the failure of society to respond to violence, and also focuses on community, the ability of people to help and support each other in times of crisis. In both Twin Peaks and Drnaso's earlier work, Beverly, there is this feeling of trust and duty to do better, and a strong sense of community that makes them wholesome responses to community disasters. Both Twin Peaks and Beverly focus on character problems, and they make you care about everyone. By contrast, in Sabrina, everyone is struggling, and there isn't much care for anyone or anything. Sabrina is the mean and unfriendly graphic novel it needs to be to talk about the problems in society today. Sabrina is a world where people talk too much and care too little, and there's a bigger reason I'm bringing in a comparison to Lynch, not just to name drop Twin Peaks. Both David Lynch's Eraserhead and Blue Velvet feature a male protagonist who worries for the safety of a mother and a child in an unsafe apartment. And in interviews, David Lynch says he was making these films in response to a paranoid fear he had that his wife and child would be endangered by the poor community he lived in while he was at work and unable to protect them. In exactly the same way, in a BBC4 interview, Nick Drnaso says that Sabrina was motivated by an attempt to fictionalize his paranoid fear that his wife would be abducted or injured while he was at work. The dead girl trope is not an attempt to sensationalize the murder of women. It is simply a male author trying to come to terms with something scarier than death, that being that no matter how strong they are, they cannot guarantee the safety of those that they love. It's important to notice this, as it reveals the author's primary intent not to make an enjoyable comic, but to raise a discussion on how grief is dealt with in modern society. At times, Sabrina reads a bit like Chuck Palahniuk's novels. It's uncomfortable, but transformative. Now on to the design of the works. I think Beverly suited Nick Drnaso's color palette better than Sabrina does. Beverly was blue and gentle, whereas Sabrina is red and violent. The pale pastel scheme is calling for gentle sincerity and realism that is rarely found in Sabrina. The silences in Beverly were nervous, but in Sabrina they're hostile. There's more tension from the passive aggression in Sabrina than there is from the active violence in Alan Moore's comics, because it's happening between real people, not superheroes, so it's unsettling because we can see ourselves in the comic. But in contrast to his color palette, Nick Drnaso's drawing style works much better with Sabrina. I get paranoid just looking at the front cover. The minimalism of the facial expression makes it so ambiguous. These very wooden facial expressions show the mismatch between inner feelings and outer appearance. And that creates a sense of unpredictability and dread. The simplicity of Nick Drnaso's faces recreate the horror of sociopaths, the blank facial expression to violence. This wooden facial expression reminds me of a passage from David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, where the actors in the film of the main director, who I believe was a caricature of David Lynch himself, are said to have the stilted wooden quality of non-professionals that helps them to strip away the pernicious illusion of realism and to remind the audience that they were in reality watching actors acting and not people behaving. So in other words, the wooden facial expressions create emotional distance when things would just be too intense to see as they were, as if they were really happening. If Nick drew better faces, his readers would be overwhelmed and put off by some of his work. It dials back some of the tension and creates emotional distance. There are parts of Sabrina that are already too awkward and just anxiety-provoking that if the drawings were better, it would be too much. And yeah, I know simple faces might be easier and quicker to draw, but I've seen a lot of styles, and this is too precise to be by accident or just for the sake of efficiency. There's something going on in the faces. Sabrina was the first comic ever to be nominated for the Man Booker Prize in 2018. I actually bought this on the second day it was released, and I read the opening chapters immediately, which was on the bench outside in the moonlight before a house party where I got kinda drunk. But I recently reread it for this review and just for the nostalgia of those times. There's a good argument for this Booker nomination being a mistake, namely that the Booker Prize strictly does not allow short stories. Sabrina is shorter and quicker to read than most short stories. Like I said, there are some pages with very few words. But there's also an argument that the Booker Prize is just getting worse every year. You can see Memento Mori's videos on that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you think Sabrina should have been longlisted for the Booker Prize. I'm still in favour that it should have been. But ultimately, I think it was a good decision because Sabrina was a highly unique comic that criticised modern social norms more acutely than most literature does these days. Sabrina explicitly responds to how the news conveys unpleasant information, particularly 9/11, the Sandy Hook shooting, the InfoWars conspiracy theories about that, Harold Camping's end time prediction, and just generally mass shootings which have been streamed on the internet. It's a very difficult topic to write or talk about even now, so Nick Drnaso deserves a lot of credit as an author for being able to write about it as delicately and as sensitively as he does. These are not just drawings, he is going beyond being a cartoonist in responding to modern tragedies better than most writers are. If I can be real for a second, most contemporary fiction isn't that good or academically studied because it fails to attempt to represent modern living. The internet rarely features in novels despite the fact that we spend most of our time using it. And there is nothing to analyze in fantasy when it does not reflect reality. But, by contrast, contemporary indie comics are becoming incredibly complex and real and mature and just so much better than they've ever been. Comics are becoming more expressive and sincere than novels. I think this is because society is more stringently censoring language than it is images. For these reasons, I think Sabrina was nominated for the Booker Prize because even outside of his genre, Nick is competing with the best contemporary writers of today. And I'm telling you that Sabrina is a highly original and important book. The reason I'm giving it 4 stars is because although it's excellently constructed and courageous in what it deals with, it's not going to be pleasant to everyone. If someone wants to read a light and fun comic, Nick Drnaso is not for you. But you really ought to give this author's work a try, so that when he becomes famous in the next few years, you can say you were there at the start. Happy reading.